This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
Unrelated.
Here now, John Walsh, host of In Pursuit with John Walsh on Investigation Discovery. He previously hosted America's Most Wanted. John, it's great to have you with us. This is another very tough story that has clearly just tugged at the heartstrings of people all across this country who have become very involved in it. What do you think about this manhunt right now? Where do you think Brian Laundrie might be?
Well, I'll tell you, Martha, the marshals, who I have great respect for as manhunters, I'm honored to be a sworn U.S. Marshal, gave me a heads up and said, look, there is a guy who came home after a 4-month camping trip, parked a van in the driveway, nobody's seen him, and now his family's filed a missing persons report. Could you get that girl on your show on Wednesday night? Well, you know what happened. In the meantime, they found Gabby's body. I wasn't that involved until they found the body, and the marshal said, now you really got to saddle up. So as you mentioned tonight, I'm doing a special of In Pursuit with John Walsh, leading with Brian Laundrie's disappearance. We did get multiple tips yesterday. Our hotline blew up because it's the people who will find this guy. People ask me all the time, you found 1,422 of the world's most wanted fugitives that no cops could catch. You found 17 of the FBI's 10 most wanted, 61 missing children, including Elizabeth Smart. How do you do it? It's very simple. I tell people, you can text me, you can call me. I don't trace, I don't tap the phones. I know people don't want to call cops because they think they'll get dragged into it. I don't care if you're legal, illegal, where you are, just text me or call me. And that's how I've called all these people, because the public is my supporters. And that blogger that found his van is the reason why they were able to find her body. Right. And the people who picked him up hitchhiking put him there in that area, hitchhiking back to his van so he could get away. So that's going to happen tonight. And I got to say one thing, Martha. I said it last week. The guy is not in the house. He was there when he came back. He scrubbed that van. His parents helped him, the dirty laundries. That's what I'm calling the mom and dad. I know they got rid of the evidence. They bought a camper top. On your show, I heard that couple say there was a new camper top there that they went on a weekend trip with their grown son, kind of unusual in a little camper top on a pickup truck, and they came back 3 days later. So when I heard that this lawyer, this Stephen Bertolino, this Johnny Cochran, O.J. Simpson wannabe, get his 15 minutes of fame lawyer, called up last Friday and said, oh, we want to do the right thing now. We want to let you know that on Tuesday, Brian left with a backpack and he went to a swamp. Then on Wednesday, we went and left him a note. Don't hurt yourself, Brian. We're worried about you. And then Thursday, in the middle of a 60,000-acre swamp, after they left the note in the car, and how the hell did they find the car in the swamp? They brought the car home. And then on Friday, finally on Friday, Stephen Bertolino, the big talking mouthpiece for the dirty laundries, called up and said, oh, Brian's missing. He's been gone since Tuesday. He left way before that. He was in that camper when the father and mother went out. I would guarantee it. And I've been doing this 33 years. He was in that camper when they went on a little trip before she was reported missing. And they bought him 5 extra days with that ruse. That kid has been throwing red herrings everywhere. And I got to go ahead, Martha. I know you got a question.
I'm fascinated by everything that you're saying. I just have about a half a minute here.
Okay, let me get
to this. Go ahead.
Let me get to this. They're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars looking in that swamp with all kinds of law enforcement. They should have been tipped off by the stop out there, the 911 call. Why didn't that 911 operator let those 2 cops know that the wonderful caller, again the public, said, I saw him slapping her around, I saw her punch him in the face? How did those cops know it? They wrote up their report and said he was the victim. They could have saved her life. Here's my big question. I would have put a black and white police car. This lawyer keeps talking about Fifth Amendment. Nobody wanted to talk to Brian and his parents. No one wants to violate the Fifth Amendment. I do it old school. Black and white in front of the house on public area street, black and white in the back of the house. If the father ever leaves, tail him in an unmarked car. How the hell did the FBI and the Northport police let this kid slip out of the house?
We got to jump out there. No, I couldn't agree with you more. And we'll be watching In Pursuit on your special. John, thank you very much.
It's a little weird to me to hear him rant like that, but okay, John Walsh. You know, there's never been another case like Adam Walsh's case. If you look at all the components of it, and I've made it pretty clear that I believe that John Walsh knows what happened to his kid. And, you know, now he's a domestic violence expert. He's had several rants on the domestic violence. His son Callahan is also getting in on the mix. I don't know what to do with people. So everybody in the country's talking about Gabby Petito. So that's not what this episode was about. But I wanted to mention the John Walsh thing because he's crazy. I have so much respect for some of the things that he's done. But when you start, and I guess this happens to everyone, you know, you look up to something long enough, you start to realize there's cracks in the pedestal. And with him, I don't even know what to say. You know, first of all, this is sort of his home territory being Florida. But then on top of it, who's he mad at? Everybody. He's mad at the lawyers. He's mad at the family of the boyfriend who's been convicted of nothing. He's mad at the FBI. He's mad at the local police. He's just mad at everybody. And I realized something. When you're John Walsh, you're always going to be mad. As long as you live that lie that your son was killed by a serial killer, as long as you're living that lie, you've done a lot of good with it, but you can't bury the good with the lie. So as long as you live the lie, you're going to be angry. At least he directs his anger to the right things, right? Like he's catching fugitives. He's talking true crime cases. He's, you know, like you said, he's a sworn U.S. Marshal that's hunting the fugitives of the world. Well, I hope you get some relief one day.
Did you see that first thing I sent you about TikTokers?
I just got it.
So what they're doing there, this came on NPR yesterday, but what they're doing is TikTokers are trading stocks. They're copying the disclosure agreements of members of Congress. And they're going on TikTok and talking about it. It's very interesting. I mean, it's definitely a new way to look at things. But the example they use, and I'm not into politics that much. They're using Nancy Pelosi's husband because she has to disclose when he is trading. The Stock Act requires lawmakers to disclose their stock trades and their spouse's stock trades within 45 days of it happening. So they've created this platform these kids have, and you can find this on NPR, it's easy to find, where they're basically using different lawmakers' stock trades to plan their own financial trades. It's fascinating.
There's actually a whole, they've made a stock watcher.
Yeah. They've got multiple social media communities, but the big thing is they've made a stock watcher where you get a push notification when it happens. And they have a House version and a Senate version. I thought that was interesting. I'm sure there will be something in here that is not entirely legal down the road.
I was going to say, it's my opinion. I don't do any of this stuff. And until you sent this to me, I mean, yeah, I guess I don't think it's ever crossed my mind. I am aware that it came to light a lot during Trump's administration. It seems like there was always some sort of innuendo being just sort of out there about, his taxes and possibly using his position for financial gain, I guess.
Yeah.
And then there was a couple senators maybe that they were being investigated because of there was hubbub about it in the media. And basically what they were saying was that some of our House or Senate members, and that's the United States House and the United States Senate, some of them were using the knowledge that they gained in their professional position to move money going into the pandemic.
Yeah, specifically Burr. Burr was the big one because he was the Senate Intelligence Committee chairman at the time.
And so, that would amount to, I think that they were gleaning towards insider trading.
Yeah, he sort of hinted, where it became problematic was he warned a group of his constituents who were like his plan was to move his stocks because he felt like the effects of the coming pandemic were going to have a bad outcome. This back in February of 2020. He warned a group of people that, were on basically his donor list that they should do it too. And his stocks that he moved were less than $2 million. But the point was that if they were started moving their money, some of these people were very well connected and very financially engaged in the stock market, and it would be like a version of insider trading, even though it wasn't coming directly from the companies themselves. It was coming with someone who was sort of in the know.
Well, plus there's actually legislation in place that prevents them from doing that.
Yeah.
It would prevent the official from using anything that they've learned in their professional position, like their public servant position, to make decisions like that.
Correct.
But the problem is there's a fine line. Actually, it's funny because Burr was one of the only ones that voted against that particular legislation because he felt like they should be able to use it. It's funny because an average person could have reviewed very few news articles as the pandemic, right before it became the pandemic. And they could have had some red flags go off and be like, I should move certain money, right? And so I feel like I don't know that anything happened to Burr, but I know that the FBI investigated it. And as far as I know, nothing happened. They didn't do
anything. They didn't do anything.
Right, because he hadn't done anything wrong. And so I feel like
he had not done anything illegal.
Okay, well...
You said wrong.
Either way. Well, I don't think he did do anything wrong because I feel like if I had $2 million in the stock market and I saw something epic happening, like a new, virus, I would consider my position, and I don't have a public servant job. So I don't think that's wrong.
Well, the position that he's in right now, he's basically saying he's not going to run for re-election in 2022. It's a big time for re-elections in the United States. 2022 will be the midterm. It's a huge deal.
And so the only thing I can think of when I look at, I think it's, you do whatever you want if you want to follow the, Senate and House stock watch or whatever. But the only thing I can think of is it's possible that they could expose some underlying things that wouldn't be exposed if all the people on TikTok that were participating weren't doing it. That's the only thing I see happening there. I don't really think there should be any question that our elected officials, more than likely, even if it's subconsciously or indirectly, they use their knowledge to better their lives.
Oh, yeah.
They would be non-human if they didn't.
They just shouldn't be doing it while they're in office. In staying in office longer, it gets more and more corrupt as it goes. That's just how it is.
Well, it's funny because I don't know. See, I just don't know. I walk a line here because it's almost like they put the law in just so they could break it. I swear.
Yeah, it kind of is. There's several things that in this realm that feel like that. Yeah.
Well, and it's all like that. If you look into, and this is not in our scope of things, and it's not a debatable topic to me, but if you look through a lot of legislative type things that happen on the federal level, a lot of times there's a lot of loopholes being they didn't write them in by accident. They're doing it on purpose. And it's to favor the movement of money in someone's direction. Okay. Because once the legislation gets put in place, even once it's found out, it takes a little while for it to be changed. And in the meantime, you've got people taking advantage of it. And by people, I mean it could be department of a state, any of the states. It could be business people. They take advantage of these laws that are put, and then it's not enough where it could be considered for somebody to have been improper, but it's enough that they were able to exploit it for a little bit. And, like I said, that's not in our wheelhouse, but I think it's interesting that this generation of TikTokers has made this observation. And I don't know, I would love to know what inspired that, what made them think, let's do this, right? I think everybody should go and look at all the disclosures that your elected officials are filing. They're all available online. And, you can get a sense of what's going on there. It also provides another layer of checks, right? Which is sort of what this is. It's like another layer of checks in the checks and balances, because they should know now that they've got an entire group, looking at these disclosures. So it could, maybe dissuade impropriety. I don't know. I don't know.
There's been several things that have happened related to the stock market that are taking advantage of and making use of all the different disclosures and some of the things that are more transparent and less transparent in the stock market.
Something that I don't know if I want to get into this. So Martha Stewart did time for insider trading. Right?
Yeah.
Everybody knows that. And that's one of the most ridiculous things ever. Is absolutely insane. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why she did that. Not why she did what she did, but why she took a plea and ended up serving time. Professional brokers do things that manipulate the market way more than an insider trading tip would, on a daily basis. And so she literally just it wasn't even really that much money. Okay. She and I think her nephew, or I don't know, somebody else.
But she didn't take a plea. She was found guilty.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm positive. They deliberated for 3 days. It was a 5-week trial. It was back in March of 2004. She was found guilty on multiple counts. She was found not guilty on the insider trading part of it, but she was found guilty of false statements to a federal investigator, obstruction of justice, conspiracy. So her sentencing was actually for that, but really they were after Bekanovich. They were after her broker.
So she's avoiding a loss of $45,000.
Yeah, he popped up and gave her some information. Her broker gave her information that was found to be non-public, and it was found that they really found that he basically panicked. And the way that he told her to cover it up was crazy, but she did it. But the truth was she hadn't really committed insider trading because she wouldn't have had the knowledge to have done that. She lied in some ways to the federal investigators, and she was definitely in on the conspiracy part of it, and she was definitely in on the obstruction of justice part of it, but she wasn't of the right mind or position to understand.
Okay, so if you're being investigated of a crime that you are ultimately found not guilty of, does it matter that you lied to investigators about it?
Well, that becomes a separate crime when it's federal investigators.
But if they really shouldn't have been investigating you to begin with, and you didn't do the actual crime, and how is that a thing? You're just having a conversation with them. You see what I'm saying, right?
Yes.
For some reason, I thought she had taken a plea, but now that I'm looking at it, anyway, my point is, that happened in 2001. So 20 years ago.
Yeah. But it all played out in I think 04, 05 was when the trial came up.
And so because I've always had it in the back of my head, at that point in time, my educational background is in business and economics. So that was a big deal. And because she is she has an empire, basically.
Yeah, she literally has an empire.
And what happened there, they made an example out of her. And in my opinion, they did her really dirty because under no circumstances should she have gone to jail for that. I feel like if you're being interviewed and you lie to officials about a crime that you ultimately aren't found to have committed, like how could she have told the truth about it in their perspective? If she didn't do it, everything she said would be a lie to them. This goes round and round and round.
This is a giant circle, and I'm getting somewhere with this.
Okay. Well, anyway, so yeah, I don't really want to get into like the whole like.
No, you don't have to. I drug you there. I'm sorry about that. I do that all the time, and like I've tried to make people more aware that it's really me taking people down rabbit holes because that's sort of my thing.
Well, and I have an opinion about this that isn't rabbit hole. It's just not what we do on the show.
Yeah. Well, I think you and I are on the same page, and like I'll just say this as I segue. The stock market is a scam. Like it doesn't matter what people think about it. I promise you, it's the exact same thing as the lottery. You have slightly more skills involved in the setup there. If you're into that, that's cool. That's your thing. I do, some stuff to a broker, but I don't.
It's really, the stock markets are very important. They're a very important part of our fictitious economy.
Right, you're right. That would be the better phrasing. Because of the way our economy is set up, the stock market is very important to it. But both of them are basically made up numbers at this point.
Well, everything is
right. So we get into this territory where that's harder to talk about. But where I was wanting to go with this was people who are in power, so to speak. I find crimes that occur to them and their families, like this whole thing that's going on with the TikTokers, that's not Nancy Pelosi, that's her husband, and it's not a crime yet. It's just one of those things that looks like, the stock market is not a crime in investing in it, but people lose life savings every single day. Maybe not large groups of people, but, a person's retirement, a person's entire golden years can be wrecked by just a couple of little things that happen in the stock market. And I wanted to use this as like an episode of Unrelated. You held your breath like you were going to say something. So if you want to say something, now's the time because I'm about to move into a whole new thing.
I didn't realize that that TikTok investigation like that we were looking at, I didn't realize that was leaning towards like some sort of criminal activity. I thought it was just an observation, but
I think it will get to be. I think using those disclosures will be considered a new type of crime, and then the Congress will write legislation about it.
Well, they would have to do that first.
I'm not saying it's a crime right now.
Yeah, I just thought
I'm saying that some idiot somewhere is going to hear that and put a bug in somebody's ear who's going to put a bug in a rep or a congressperson's ear who's going to decide it's insider trading. And that's how we're going to get to the point that they make new legislation. That's what's going to happen.
Right. And so how does that go down? Like, you can't copy what we're doing. That's what it's going to have to say, basically.
Oh, well, so that won't be the first step to take. The first step they'll take is they want to protect their financial privacy, which that's fine. They can. They just need to leave. Go home, retire, right. All of them, retire. But there's your privacy.
As far as saying, like, yes. We don't, that should never be put into place.
Right.
It's for everybody's benefit that the disclosures are required.
Right. And eventually I'm going to get into the Capitol Police on an episode of Unrelated because I want to explain to people what's happening there. But that's not this episode. This episode is different. We covered a case already that was very important to us personally. And there are some things going on in that case about people in power. And I want to talk about a number of things related to it. But the first thing I want to talk about is this is about the case of Barney Harris.
Right. He was my friend in high school. He's somebody I went to school with who was killed earlier this year.
And the way that he was killed was bizarre. We have earlier episodes on this called, True Crime, Excess Unrelated. And we talk about what police described as a shootout between two rival cartels down in Alamance County, North Carolina, specifically in the outskirts of the town of Mebane next to Green Level. This is pretty far out there in what people would call the country or sort of a rural area. So the first update actually happened a couple of months afterwards. In July, so that homicide occurred on April 8th of 2021. It was actually a double homicide. Basically, they considered one member of each cartel to have been murdered. One of those people who was murdered was a man named Barney Harris, who was a beloved Spanish teacher down closer to Charlotte, North Carolina, which is not close to this area. It's several hours away. But they made an arrest in July of 2021, a couple months after that. And this is a man that his name is Garyon Dedwa Stepney, and he is 41 years old. He's from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Oddly enough, we also know Garyon. We don't know him as Garyon Dewa. We know him as...
his name is Garjay.
We know him as Garjay. And, trying to spell that and get his criminal record was a nightmare.
It's not right anywhere. But it's funny. I believe it ultimately was cut out. But I had made a prediction.
That he was involved. Yeah.
And I sort of knew. And so now he has been arrested. I've had a really hard time doing the follow-up on this case. So the episode that kind of kicked off our little side road of True Crime Excess Unrelated, it's called All Love, No Fear. And it was about, it's a very authentic take on what happened to my classmate Barney Harris and how I felt about it and how some of the people that also knew him in the same capacity felt about it. And it was brought to my attention, I can't do the follow-up. I did see where Garjay was arrested, but somebody told me that the sheriff of Alamance County has maintained his position that he initially put out on the press conference that Barney more than likely was responsible for killing the 18-year-old that was shot 2 times execution style in the back of the head. And I am a little bit exasperated by that. But so that was recently. So the sheriff has not come back from his position that Barney's responsible for killing that kid. Do you know this?
Yes.
Okay. And it does not change my opinion. I don't know what happened. I wasn't there. And a lot of people are like, well, what does it even matter? He's dead, right? Well, it actually does matter to me because you've got a situation where Barney is dead no matter what. So, the actual story coming out isn't going to happen. There's, it is what it is. He doesn't get a side of it. And I feel like it's really irresponsible for a sheriff to double down on that, which is what I consider him having done. But it's different. I mean, it's a terrible thing that he was killed in a trailer, a stash house. He's wearing a bulletproof vest, and that leads me to believe he was probably shot in the head and all kinds of terrible things. And so that's bad enough. But then they have him going out as a killer. And it's very different, in my opinion.
Yeah, this was, we covered the first part of this in detail. I wanted to go over a few things related to this. That was one of my portion of my updates. They're not backing down. They're trying 2 other people for felony murder and first-degree murder, but they are not backing down off the fact that they believe that Barney Harris did this. So they're basically including it at this point that in this version of events that about 12:52 a.m. on April the 8th, the sheriff's office got multiple 911 calls reporting shots fired at a mobile home park in the 1000 block of Wyatt Road. The sheriff described this house as a stash house and said that 18-year-old Alonzo Beltran Lara had been shot at the scene. He was still alive at the time and later died at a hospital. Allegedly, he was a drug runner who lived in the trailer with one other person. And they believed that one of the cartels belonged to the Sinaloa New Generation cartel, and that the trailer was a stash house for them. This is according to Terry Johnson. The other was a criminal enterprise that was robbing the stash house, which is where Garjay comes in addition to multiple other people at this point. Garjay, Barney Harris is thought to be part of that, and Stephen Alexander Stewart Jr., who has been described as
Barney's brother-in-law. I have not been able to confirm that anywhere.
Yeah, depending on how you look at that, you get different results. But to kick it off, Stephen Stewart is charged with first-degree murder and then felony murder. So those are two very different charges. First-degree murder, which he has 2 counts of those, is first-degree murder means you killed someone, premeditated, and you killed someone. The difference between that and felony murder is felony murder means a felony was happening or in process when someone died. So it is a little strange that they've done that. But I want to read off some of the charges related to Garjay. And I don't know him as the longer name. I never have. I don't know that long name. I think I heard it in school many years ago. But
I've never heard him called that ever.
He's a couple years younger than me, so I don't know that for sure. He is now facing a lot of charges. So I'm going to run over them really quickly. First up, we have felony trafficking in cocaine and felony trafficking in opium and heroin. Then we have a felony trafficking of opium or heroin. I don't know the difference in the two statute-wise. They're slightly different. Felony maintaining a vehicle in a dwelling to traffic. And then we have 2 counts of felony conspiracy. One is for trafficking in cocaine. The other is for trafficking in heroin. And then we have a misdemeanor 1-ounce possession of marijuana, another felony conspiracy to traffic opium, and then actual felony trafficking of opium or heroin, and felony trafficking of cocaine. He has an additional count of felony trafficking of opium, heroin, and maintaining a vehicle or a dwelling to traffic, and then an additional felony conspiracy to traffic cocaine. So on top of that, he has a single felony first-degree murder charge. And we haven't got deep into looking at the legal ramifications, but I wanted to talk about those charges for a second. So we have 3 drugs involved. The marijuana appears to be personal use. We knew that there had been marijuana talked about. Honestly, at this point, to me, marijuana is not really... I mean, I know it's legally criminal in some places, but marijuana is not a drug I take issue with somebody having a misdemeanor possession charge with, which is what Garjay has. He has a stack of these felony trafficking in opium and cocaine charges. He was found in Greensboro, North Carolina. That's where he was arrested, which is to the west of the location of the shooting that had happened. And you got to keep in mind, so Lara, the guy that died at the hospital, he came basically back to the stash house. His hands and feet were bound. He was shot with 2 wounds to the back of the head. And what was described as Meg has said repeatedly, an execution style killing. Harris was found in the bedroom. He had been shot multiple times, and he was wearing a vest, gloves, and a face covering. We've sort of been on the fence about what Barney's involvement may have been like, but we would like to remind everyone he was a high school Spanish teacher. So there's a part of us that feels like whatever involvement might have gone on here, regardless of the sheriff's position, it might have had more to do with his affiliation and sort of allegiance to these, childhood friends, basically, and his ability to speak Spanish. But he was a beloved teacher who had removed himself from the area and was back into this when he was killed. But I want to talk about that for a second. Terry Johnson is very upset with the cartels and how they bring drugs into his area. And I want to go through and I want to describe a couple of things for you. I think this may be part of the root of that problem. And I'm going to tell you a story about someone else. So where I'm going to start with is I'm going back 9 years to an incident that occurred with a man named Tony Lee Woodleaf in Elon, North Carolina. And you can read about this online. Most of the articles that are available are from August of 2013. This headline simply reads, "Man found guilty of assault," and it's in the Times News. It's a local news there to Terry Johnson and to his county, which is Alamance County, and to these towns, which the surrounding towns are. Elon is to the west, Graham is to the east of Burlington, which is in the center of Alamance County, and then Mebane and Green Level are to the east of Graham. There's a small town called Haw River that comes into play here. A jury deliberated for 7 minutes Thursday in Graham before finding a man guilty of assault. Tony Lee Woodleaf of Gibsonville Ossipee Road in Elon was sentenced to the maximum time allowed under state law for assaulting a female. The assault occurred November the 18th outside the victim's home on Bass Mountain Road. The victim testified that Woodleaf punched and hit her inside his moving car, and she jumped out to escape. The victim's name is Emily Robinson. She is Terry Johnson's daughter. Terry Johnson is the sheriff of Alamance County. Woodleaf was appealing a guilty verdict in Alamance County District Court before a jury in Alamance County Superior Court. Superior Court Judge Rob Johnson issued an active 150-day sentence, the maximum allowed for the offender under state law, based on Woodleaf's criminal record. He received the same maximum sentence in district court. Woodleaf's record includes 2 previous convictions for assault on a female, felony larceny, felony breaking and entering, and possession of a firearm by a felon. The judge said Woodleaf had 19 convictions in Alamance and Caswell counties over the last 20 years. Sir, you've amassed a bit of a record and you're 40 years old. There comes a time when a man has to learn his lesson, Johnson told Woodleaf. If I get another one, it won't be in Alamance County. I can tell you that. I'll be a long way from here, Woodleaf told the judge. Johnson said, "It shouldn't be anywhere. I suggest you think long and hard before you raise your hand at anybody else." The trial began on Wednesday and included testimony from Robinson and Bill Marsh, an agent with the State Bureau of Investigation. Marsh investigated to avoid a conflict of interest stemming from Robinson's relation to the sheriff. Woodleaf chose not to testify, and the defense didn't put any evidence on trial. Robinson's testimony was that Woodleaf arrived at her home about 1 a.m. November the 18th and began beating on her door. She refused to answer the phone calls the previous night, and Joshua Jones, who was inside with Robinson, confronted Woodleaf, told him to leave, and punched him. Woodleaf chased Jones through Robinson's yard with his car, Robinson said. She eventually agreed to get in the car and speak with him so Woodleaf would calm down and leave. That's when they began to argue, and Woodleaf drove away from her home and began hitting her. Woodleaf admitted to backhanding Robinson in an interview with Marsh. During that interview, Woodleaf also said that Jones shot at him that night and later threatened him. Marsh said Jones refused to speak to him during the investigation, and following the trial, Marsh said that SBI policy forbids him to discuss cases with the press. Jones and Woodleaf were friends before the incident, but Jones and Robinson are now dating, Robinson testified. In closing arguments, Alamance County Assistant District Attorney Paul Soderberg said photos, Robinson's testimony, and Woodleaf's own statement to investigators proved he committed the crime. He asked the jury not to be distracted by questions about Jones' alleged behavior. This man, Tony Woodleaf, needs to find that fundamental message that his big hands on his big frame are not for hitting, Soderberg said. Defense attorney Andrew Fogarty argued that Robinson trusted Woodleaf more than she let on in testimony, allowing him to stay at her home and watch her son. The state's painted a picture of Mr. Woodleaf and what happened that night. If you don't think it was like that, we respectfully ask you to find Mr. Woodleaf not guilty, Fogarty said. During sentencing, Fogarty requested that Woodleaf do as little time as possible in the Alamance County Jail. Multiple reasons why he shouldn't be housed there. It's better for the Alamance County Sheriff's Department, the DA's office, Mr. Woodleaf, and the county in general, Fogarty said. Johnson ordered that Woodleaf be transferred to the custody of the North Carolina Department of Corrections as soon as possible. So they pulled this guy out of jail and they moved him to a minimum security facility instead of a jail because of the relationship to Terry Johnson's daughter. That's not what's interesting. What's interesting is,
right now, we're losing the war.
It's a face we often see, a problem he continues to battle.
We're seeing
Alamance County Sheriff Terry Johnson speaking about the dangers of drugs in this community, the impact it has on businesses, and more importantly, families.
51 years in law enforcement.
This interview also about drugs in Alamance County, but it is different. Unlike any interview he's ever done, the suspect in this case is his daughter.
I honestly have felt over the years sorry for her family is going through stuff like this. but at the time I never thought it would hit mine, but I knew there was a possibility.
41-year-old Emily Robinson has battled an opioid problem in the past, arrested last week by Burlington police, now charged with possession and intent to sell fentanyl.
May have saved my daughter's life. We never know. It's a sad situation for any family to have to go through.
Sheriff Johnson has spent his entire career trying to root out the drug problem in Alamance County, often saying the war on drugs impacts all of us.
Until we realize just how bad it is in this nation, there's going to be more families going through what I'm going through.
The exact details of this case are still unclear. Burlington police not saying much. One thing we do know, it started with a death investigation.
My daughter will have to stand, before a judge, and I'm going to, whatever the judge does is, I'm going to have to support that.
Right now, Sheriff Johnson is both sheriff and father, knowing this journey is not going to be easy.
Once you're hooked on any type drug, it's like a demon on your back, and you have to shake it off.
As for the investigation, the sheriff is deferring all questions to the Burlington Police Department. Kevin Kennedy, 2 Wants to Know.
September 21st, 2021, in Burlington, North Carolina. The daughter of Alamance County Sheriff Terry Johnson was arrested and charged with possession with intent to sell and deliver drugs. Burlington police made the arrest last Thursday after an investigation. Emily Robinson, 41, is currently being held in the Alamance County Jail. Police said that Robinson was found in possession of fentanyl and other drug paraphernalia. I've honestly felt over the years for the families that had to go through stuff like that, but at the time I never thought it would hit mine. I always knew that might be a possibility, said Sheriff Johnson. Burlington police won't share many details about the ongoing investigation, but said that it started with a death investigation. How Robinson is connected is not clear. Police said the charges could involve the packaging or repackaging of drugs and processing or even growing. My daughter will have to stand before a judge, and whatever the judge does, I'm going to support that. Sheriff Johnson told WFMY News his daughter dealt with an opioid problem more than a dozen years ago after battling cancer. Robinson was treated for the addiction and seemed to be drug-free for the past decade or so. There was, however, concern recently that Robinson may have started taking drugs again. According to the sheriff, he said he gave his daughter a drug test like the one you get at a pharmacy. Robinson's currently being held on a $20,000 secured bond, and Sheriff Johnson said his daughter will most likely be released from jail this week, at which time she'll enter a drug treatment facility. All right, do you follow everything I just said?
Yeah, I got it.
So here's my digging leads me to a very different story. First of all, we're still at the same house from 2013. She still lives in the same place out in Snow Camp, which is in Alamance County. So it's interesting because I know a lot about Burlington and the city of Burlington there. I've talked to them about different crimes over the years. They've had some interesting cases that are still open that I have had an interest in. Normally, everything in Burlington is the result of an interagency task force with the Alamance County Sheriff's Department, but this one wasn't. And the interesting part about this case is it actually starts with an overdose victim. She allegedly sold an illegal narcotic mix to a man who ultimately died after taking the drug. What the drug was identified as was fentanyl. It's interesting because Terry Johnson has taken a hard line on illegal narcotics for 20 years now. He's incredibly racist. This whole area is constantly under scrutiny for different tactics by the Department of Justice that are considered to be racist on their face. You and I have talked about that, whether or not that's a result of sort of the old guard or if that's a result of just like ongoing problems and not understanding. But this, Brian Long is an assistant chief at the city of Burlington's police department. He told the Alamance News that the death of Robert Stamer Jr. on September the 15th at 415 South Anthony Street in Burlington, that Emily Robinson's arrest is related to that ongoing death investigation. But information was passed along to the narcotics team that Miss Robinson was the one who was distributing the drugs that Stamer had gotten his hands on. That is fascinating to me in 17 different ways. What about you?
Yeah, it's fascinating. That's a good word for it. I was really shocked, actually.
Well, she's got a number of charges coming up. I was
shocked that it was brought to light so blaringly.
It's a little weird, right?
It is.
I didn't really know what to think about. I looked at it and I was sort of like, could this possibly like backfire? And I was in my head, I saw this like photo of Barney, and it was from, I don't know where it was from. I don't know who put it up there. It might have come from like something you were doing, but I was just imagining how Terry Johnson has talked about him.
Yeah.
And I was just curious, like, how would Terry Johnson want me to talk about his daughter? Because I just gave you 2 incidents from her world, and there's a lot more that I'm looking into. I've been looking into the stuff related to Barney. I did go out and I talked to people who were in Green Level the night that happened. I've been trying to figure out how to tell pieces of Barney's story as I move forward. I wanted to wait a little while for it to die down because for a couple of days, a version of his story was everywhere where people were talking about Barney having been a member of a criminal enterprise who had a shootout with a drug cartel. And despite the fact that Terry Johnson doesn't even know what drug cartel he's dealing with and probably does not know which shoe he put on first this morning, I can't help but think if someone ran with this story and dug their heels into Emily's case, because I already have started doing it, and I can tell you there is so much more there. I wonder how he would feel about that.
So this is sort of where, and this is on a personal level because the only reason we're talking about this case is because it is personal to us. I have felt like all along that Barney did not get a fair say in this matter. I felt like law enforcement was irresponsible in the press conference that it was maybe like 10 days after he died when they finally said like how he had died. And it was Sheriff Johnson who was talking. And I've always felt like it's irresponsible. Because in the back of my mind, I'm like, yeah, Barney didn't kill that kid. That's what I'm thinking. But I wasn't there, and it's possible maybe I didn't know anything about Barney, right? Maybe I really didn't know him because I hadn't seen him in years, but I did go to school with him for a really long time. So I can't like yell it from the rooftops, right? I've said it out loud. I have no problem saying it. I think I've been pretty clear about saying it and saying, it is my like sort of biased speculation. I could go even further and I could say that, between the people that were there, it makes me even more certain it was not Barney that killed that kid. Right? I could be wrong. I could be completely wrong. And my classmate, who was always so funny and well put together and coached children that were around the kid that dies age, and had, children that were around that kid's age, maybe he did put 2 bullets in the back of that kid's head, execution style. And maybe that's just always going to be a little too much for me to swallow. But I wish I knew enough to shout it from the rooftop. I don't. But when this came out, you sent me this yesterday, I thought to myself, well, to me, it backs up what I'm saying. And what that essentially would be, not having the ability to shout it from the rooftops, not knowing it well enough, is that like, maybe you don't keep saying it since Barney's not going to be tried and convicted of it. It could come out, but it's always going to be speculation. Because even the witnesses that are going to be part of, being charged, that they are being charged, even the witnesses, I feel like their version of events is always going to be subject to being skewed, right? Skewed to save their own tushes. And And because of that, because when a sheriff says that Barney Harris executed this 18-year-old boy, then as far as everybody is concerned, Barney executed this 18-year-old boy. And it doesn't matter how many times I say, I find that highly unlikely. Okay. And I feel like it's with great power comes great responsibility. And the fact that everybody would take Terry Johnson's word for stuff means like he should think even like more than twice about saying anything like what he's saying, okay, about Barney. I have thoroughly reviewed the case. There has been nothing to indicate to me that that there's evidence that Barney shot this kid, okay?
Right.
And without that evidence, I feel like a neutral approach is required from law enforcement. And, you know, I don't know if you know this or not, but Barney's legacy, there's no legacy. He has been wiped from the face of the earth. He is touted as a disgrace. There is no talking to anybody about any of it in any capacity. He humiliated his family, and right. They're left with a gigantic hole. And I'm, very tiny voiced in the background going, but wait, I don't think that's what happened. And nobody cares. But I think that Terry Johnson's daughter being charged, it sort of lends towards what I'm talking about here. It is entirely possible that Terry Johnson has no idea what he's talking about because his hard line on drugs apparently didn't apply to his own family.
Yep.
And so, he can say he didn't know what was going on all he wants, but he knew what was going on in, the trailer where Barney supposedly executed this kid, but you didn't know what your daughter was doing?
Well, so yeah, that's sort of my point here. He can say, "Oh, she used to be an opiate addict," and blah blah blah. She's charged with distribution. One of the sources I talked to said that there was some kind of mail order scheme involved. I haven't got into that yet, and it's not on paper. Where I don't know if it's her or if it's someone else or what's going on there. But that could potentially make this a federal crime.
You saw where the police department specifically didn't involve the sheriff's department, right? They didn't want any.
That's why I mentioned that it normally was an interagency task force, but it was just the Burlington Police Department.
What does that tell you?
Well, I started to wonder a number of things about the Burlington Police Department and why they were doing that. And I've gone down the rabbit hole of trying to find out more. I'm not there yet, but I do want to point out one more thing that recently happened within the last year. I chose a very specific way to talk about his daughter to start with, and that was an assault case. The assault case, there was a man named Tony Lee Woodleaf who was involved. That was the gentleman who was convicted of assaulting Emily. Well, recently, Mr. Woodleaf is hard to defend. So I wanted to say that, I understand, what is about to come out of my mouth is terrible, but I'm trying to put it in a larger context to see if there's more to it. On March 21st, 2020, an article popped up saying that the Alamance County Special Victims Unit at the Sheriff's Department was charging him, Tony Lee Woodleaf of Graham, after he broke into the victim's home and held her against her will and forced himself on her. He was taken into custody in Caswell County with assistance from Caswell County Sheriff's Office and the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation. He's currently charged with felony breaking and entering, felony first-degree kidnapping, and felony first-degree rape. The investigation is ongoing. When I go to look up his criminal record, it's terrible. This guy has a long criminal record. It goes on for years. He had the assault on a female from 2013. The next thing they had after that was a simple assault where he got into a fight in 2018. But prior to that, it had been since 2001 when he really had any charges. He did end up with a possession of a firearm charge, and I'm not defending this guy. He has a lot of charges in Alamance County right now.
Right now?
This second.
Where's Caswell County compared to Alamance County?
So Caswell County, to the east of Alamance County is Orange County. One county over, like to the east, is Orange County. So you got Alamance County, and to the east is Orange. So Alamance and Orange. And above the two of them, sort of overlapping the two directly to the north, is Caswell County.
Okay.
So it's right above the Orange County area. So this guy, I just, on a happenstance, I wanted to see who was charging him with all these things and sort of what was going on there. But when I go to look up his court dates, it's fascinating to me. They keep charging him with more stuff. The Woodleaf guy. Alamance County does. So right now, Mr. Tony Lee Woodliff has a total of 34 charges. False reports to a police station, simple assault, misdemeanor probation violation.
Those are charges with pending court dates?
Yes.
Is he in custody?
Yes.
Where?
It's what I'm trying to figure out, but it looks like Alamance County.
So I would say that that could be vindictive.
It is. I'm not saying so. It's weird. All right. So
well, he might be a terrible guy. I mean, it's not. It doesn't sound like he's a peach by any means.
I started out saying people abusing positions of power. Like that's where I started this episode. But this is what I'm wondering here. This is my question that I'm asking myself. I'm looking at this guy, and like honestly, like I want to throw away the key, but there's still a legal process. So if Terry Johnson didn't know his daughter for like do you believe that she was clean for a decade and suddenly started distributing fentanyl? Because that's not a thing.
I don't believe any of that.
Right. Okay. So we can agree that there's a good likelihood that Terry Johnson covers for Emily, right? Don't you think? A little bit? Or gives her a heads up or something. And that's why, in my mind, that's why Burlington left him out.
Okay. Well, that's what I was wondering was like, what have they seen that led them to, because there was an overdose, right? But the investigation, like overdoses don't necessarily come with an accompanying investigation like this one did, right?
Right.
And so I feel like there had to have been a motivation there by somebody, right? And I don't know. I mean, it's absolutely their job to investigate this type of stuff, to, investigate, and because they specifically started the investigation and carried it out without the sheriff's department, who otherwise would have been involved.
Correct.
And that it's okay, I guess, for them to do that, but
it's done for the purposes, like normally that interagency task force exists because it has more resources.
Right. But so on the face of the guy's overdose, is it readily apparent that there's going to be a conflict of interest with the sheriff's department?
It does not seem to be, from what I can tell. I just started digging into him
so
when I got sidelocked by Woodley.
That's what makes me think that there has to be something prompting them to exclude, the task force members that are part of the sheriff's department from it, because it's not like it's a direct connection. So Correct. They had to have been. I feel like they were looking for something. And
this is a small pool of people in that area that we're talking about.
I understand that, but it makes me think let's just say that they were avoiding a conflict of interest, except, and that would be fine. Like, they should absolutely avoid a conflict of interest, because more than anything, even if law enforcement can't separate themselves by their own volition, like, there are steps in place for others to help them separate themselves. Like in this case, they didn't invite them to be part of the investigation. And so, like, Sheriff Johnson wasn't put in a position where it had to be done, right? He was just left out, except at the beginning of the investigation, that wouldn't have been known.
Right.
And so I have a feeling that, I don't just have a feeling. I would say that logic requires that there to have been something behind that. And, I wouldn't even care about any of this really, except for the fact that in my opinion, Sheriff Johnson spoke out of turn at his press conference back in April. And then and I haven't listened again. I haven't followed the case. I've gotten little updates from some people who've just, informed me about stuff. And when they said that in my mind, Sheriff Johnson was doubling down on Barney killing the kid, and it just burnt me up, because I can't prove that he didn't, but it also hasn't been shown with evidence that he did. And I feel like that's just pouring salt on a wound. There's no question in my mind that the Alamance, the Burlington police, the police department leaving the sheriff's department out, it undermines Terry Johnson's credibility in ways that support my thoughts on the whole situation. And I hope, and see, that's like, I'm not saying anything out loud, because quite frankly, I can't afford to get into a useless battle with law enforcement. It's useless.
Yeah. Well, so here's what I'm wondering. I'm wondering if this Graham man, who clearly has done some shit, don't get me wrong, but this guy, I'm wondering if okay, so this is how I look at this. So first of all, the sheriff doesn't have a good excuse in this situation if his daughter is affiliated in any way with drug distribution. Like, he can't say he didn't know. He can't say, like, it happens in some places and I just let it, because he can't take a hard line on something and do all of those things. But then I look at this guy, Tony Woodleaf, and I keep coming back to him because he's the perfect example of someone who has definitely committed some crimes. I'm not sure whether or not they escalate to the level that he's charged at. I do find it interesting that the Special Victims Unit is involved, and I hope they're doing the right thing. I hope it's not pressure from above, is all I can say. I hope they're doing something on the victim's behalf.
Doesn't it speak, this isn't, this is my observation, and I'd like to get your observation on what I'm going to say. The fact that he is incarcerated, and he has previously been incarcerated, and that means, like, he wasn't just arrested, like, he was actually convicted and he was held in jail. And so
correct.
Right now he's being held on charges that he will go to trial for, plead out, or whatever. They'll go through the system. Correct. Don't you find, I personally find 34 charges. Is that that's what you said, right?
Yeah. So they started with an initial set of like 10 charges, and then they've charged him with like multiple counts of obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence, is violating protective orders.
When you have the opportunity, perhaps you could see if that happens frequently to other people who perhaps didn't get into an altercation with Terry Johnson's daughter 8 years ago.
It doesn't, and that's what drew my attention to it all.
That's just overcharging. He hasn't done anything to be locked up, for life. But anytime you've got that sort of thing happening there, you got to wonder. and you say, yes, he's done terrible things, and it's possible he has. I don't know this person. I don't know anything about him. I do, however, know that once you start in the system, it can accumulate really fast. And once it's shown that that's the kind of person you are, because you and I have an impression of this guy. He's a criminal, right?
Right.
Okay, well, what if the very first thing that happened to him, it wasn't like, what if he got pressured into taking a plea? And so then he's got a conviction. And then so the next time, and I'm not saying like in the actual courtroom, but I'm saying like the next time around, it's that much easier for law enforcement to make the assumption that this guy is a criminal. And it's that much more pressure on him to take another plea. And so it sounds to me like there was stuff happening here, but don't be fooled by him having 34 pending charges. There's a problem happening there.
Yeah, it's fair. So it's a interesting case, and I'm not accusing anyone of anything at this point. I'm just saying this person.
It's just
they
weird.
were in the Alamance jail, and I actually think they're in custody, but they've been moved away from the Alamance jail at this point.
I would like to know, I feel like people that live in that county, they should have an opinion about whether 34 charges against that particular defendant are worth the resources that they're requiring. Right.
And that's sort of where we're at in this is like, so where I'm going to leave this episode of Unrelated for now is, Martha Stewart did time for dumping $40,000 worth of stock and then sort of lying about how it went down. Whether she how she got the information, that's the basis for the charges. But she was a person who's considered to be in power to be able to get that information, and they made an example out of her is what they did. But what about people who have no power? What about people who are on the other end of the spectrum? Either they're dead or they're a criminal and nobody cares what happens to them once they're arrested and charged with something and put behind bars. What happens to them? That's where Unrelated is headed next. Thank you for joining us. We are sponsored by LabRottiCreations.com. You can check them out at LabRottiCreations.com, and you can still use the code CRIMEXS for a fun pop pet portrait of your own pet. You can also reach us on Twitter, Instagram at TrueCrimeXS, or you can give us a call if you know anything about any of the cases that we're talking about at 252-365-5593. You can also reach us at Gmail at truecrimexs@gmail.com, and you can check out our website at www.truecrimexs.com. We'll see you next time.
This is True Crime XS.
Unrelated.
I have a lot of resources in North Carolina. One of the cases I was looking at covering, I keep saying I can't get it out of my head, but the case that I'm looking at covering is in North Carolina. So we may come back around to some of these unrelated instances and do something a little more thorough, because I do think there's something to all of this. It's very complicated to try and put it all together in a narrative. I figure if I do it over time.
High clouds drifting away, leaving no shadows under. First step out of the maze, follow the path and wander. And we go with no illusions. And we leave all our conclusions. lost these eyes.